While the world braces for the terrifying possibility of an all-out war, intelligence reports suggest a completely different reality. Headlines scream of impending doom, of missile strikes and massive military mobilizations. Yet beneath this deafening roar of public threats, a quiet and high-stakes negotiation is unfolding. American and Iranian diplomats are allegedly engaging in top-secret back-channel talks, navigating a precarious geopolitical minefield. These clandestine meetings are not just about preventing a regional conflict. They hold the key to determining the fate of 1/3 of the global oil supply. What we see on our screens is merely the theater. The true battle is being fought in the shadows, far from the probing lenses of the cameras.
For months, the global media cycle has been dominated by a carefully orchestrated symphony of hostility. Televised military parades showcasing massive ballistic missiles in Tehran, alongside fierce political rhetoric from Washington, create an atmosphere of inevitable collision. Politicians stand behind podiums, delivering fiery speeches designed to project absolute strength and uncompromising resolve to their domestic audiences. However, experts in international relations argue that this aggressive posturing is a calculated diplomatic tool. By amplifying the threat of war, both nations create a dense smokescreen that provides their negotiators with the necessary cover to make difficult compromises behind closed doors. The loudest threats in public often serve to mask the quietest and most significant conversations taking place out of sight.
Away from the partisan cheering and the relentless, demanding news cycle, the real diplomacy takes place in neutral territories like Oman or Qatar. In dimly lit, heavily secured rooms, high-ranking officials from Washington and Tehran sit across from specialized intermediaries. Direct eye contact may be rare and handshakes completely non-existent, but the exchange of crucial messages is continuous. Here, there are no fiery speeches for the public, only calculated demands and strategic concessions. The primary focus of these hidden dialogues is establishing a mutual understanding of absolute boundaries. Both sides are fully aware that an uncontrolled escalation would be catastrophic, not only for their respective regimes, but for the fragile architecture of the entire global economy. The ultimate leverage in this diplomatic chess match floats through a narrow, treacherous strip of water known as the Strait of Hormuz. Through this vital maritime choke point passes roughly 30% of the world's seaborne traded oil. The mere suggestion of its closure sends immediate, debilitating shockwaves through global financial markets. American negotiators understand implicitly that ensuring the unimpeded flow of energy is a paramount national security interest that cannot be compromised. Conversely, Iranian officials know that their geographical dominance over the strait is their single strongest bargaining chip. Every whisper of a threat and every subsequent secret assurance is meticulously calibrated to manipulate the global anxiety surrounding this critical artery of international commerce. Within the highly secured strategic command centers of Washington, D.C., policymakers face an incredibly complex puzzle. They must perfectly balance the necessity of containing Iran's nuclear ambitions and expanding regional influence with the absolute imperative of avoiding another costly, seemingly endless Middle Eastern war. Analysts pore over high-resolution satellite imagery and complex intercept transcripts, desperately trying to decipher Tehran's true intentions, hidden beneath the thick layer of public belligerence. The overarching American strategy relies heavily on a doctrine of maximum pressure, coupled with unacknowledged off-ramps.
by enforcing crippling economic sanctions while secretly offering conditional avenues for relief. Washington attempts to systematically force Tehran into compliance without backing them into a desperate corner where war appears as their only viable option.
Meanwhile, in the heavily guarded corridors of power in Tehran, the Supreme National Security Council constantly orchestrates its own meticulous survival strategy. The Iranian leadership is deeply and painfully aware of the economic strangulation caused by severe international sanctions. Their domestic stability is under constant, looming threat from runaway inflation and widespread public dissatisfaction. For Tehran, the secret negotiations are not merely diplomacy, they are an essential lifeline. They must extract just enough economic relief to pacify their restless domestic audience while strictly maintaining their ideological stance of resistance against Western influence. It is a profoundly delicate balancing act of appearing unyielding on state television while signaling a pragmatic, desperate willingness to deal through deeply encrypted diplomatic channels.
The fragile success of these clandestine talks relies entirely on the absolute discretion of silent mediators. Swiss diplomats representing U.S. interests, working alongside seasoned Omani and Qatari envoys, serve as the vital structural bridges spanning a vast chasm of historical hostility. These intermediaries carry highly classified messages back and forth, bearing the heavy burden of translating not just the literal words, but the subtle cultural nuances and rigid red lines of both sovereign nations. They work tirelessly, day and night, to ensure that a simple misinterpretation does not spiral into a catastrophic military miscalculation. Without these unsung architects of backdoor diplomacy, the direct communication channel between Washington and Tehran would remain sealed off forever, inviting disaster. The underlying effectiveness of this shadow diplomacy is almost immediately reflected on the trading floors of global financial markets. Oil prices act as a real-time, highly sensitive barometer of the perceived tension between the two adversaries. When public rhetoric flares up uncontrollably, raw speculation quickly drives energy costs higher, inflating the cost of living for billions worldwide. However, astute and experienced market observers often notice a subtle, seemingly unexplainable stabilization in prices that entirely contradicts the loud, terrifying headlines. This stabilization is the direct, intended result of whispered assurances systematically leaked from the secret negotiation rooms to key financial players. The back-channel dialogue effectively establishes a hard ceiling on market panic, prioritizing global economic stability over political posturing. A critical, often misunderstood component of this complex geopolitical relationship is the unwritten doctrine of controlled escalation. When actual military strikes do occur, they are rarely spontaneous. Rather, they are meticulously choreographed events. Targets are carefully selected in advance to purposefully minimize human casualties, and crucial back-channel warnings are sometimes quietly issued hours before the first impact. These kinetic military actions are less about starting a comprehensive war and significantly more about sending a violent, unmistakable strategic message. They provide a mechanism for each side to satisfy the bloodlust of their domestic hardliners by demonstrating formidable strength, yet deliberately stopping short of crossing the unseen red lines that would inevitably trigger an unstoppable, catastrophic chain reaction.
Even as elite diplomats quietly negotiate terms of restraint, an invisible and utterly relentless war rages continuously in the cyber domain. State-sponsored hackers from both formidable nations engage in daily, highly destructive skirmishes, aggressively targeting critical civilian infrastructure, vulnerable power grids, and highly sensitive nuclear facilities.
This vast digital battlefield serves as yet another vital arena for extracting leverage. A highly successful cyber attack can effectively cripple an adversary's operational capabilities without ever firing a single conventional bullet, forcing them back to the negotiation table from a distinct position of weakness. Intelligence agencies continuously monitor every keystroke, proving that while these nations may talk of peace, they are actively and fiercely preparing for total technological warfare.
Even as elite diplomats quietly negotiate terms of restraint, an invisible and utterly relentless war rages continuously in the cyber domain. State-sponsored hackers from both formidable nations engage in daily, highly destructive skirmishes, aggressively targeting critical civilian infrastructure, vulnerable power grids, and highly sensitive nuclear facilities. This vast digital battlefield serves as yet another vital arena for extracting leverage. A highly successful cyber attack can effectively cripple an adversary's operational capabilities without ever firing a single conventional bullet, forcing them back to the negotiation table from a distinct position of weakness. Intelligence agencies continuously monitor every keystroke, proving that while these nations may talk of peace, they are actively and fiercely preparing for total technological warfare. The painstaking culmination of these exhaustive back-channel talks rarely ever results in a formally signed, publicly celebrated international treaty. Instead, they produce highly classified, unwritten agreements, serving as informal but binding understandings of mutual restraint. The core terms are usually quite straightforward, yet inherently fragile. America quietly turns a blind eye to certain heavily sanctioned oil sales, discreetly providing the struggling Iranian economy with vital foreign currency. In direct exchange, Iran temporarily agrees to cap its uranium enrichment levels and systematically limit the aggressive, destabilizing activities of its regional proxy militia forces. This is fundamentally a cold transaction, born not out of growing trust, but out of absolute, unyielding necessity for survival on both sides. Back in the fiercely partisan environment of Washington, maintaining the absolute secrecy of these talks is a matter of strict political survival. If the full, unvarnished extent of the diplomatic compromises were made entirely public, it would spark immediate, uncontainable outrage on Capitol Hill. Hardline politicians vehemently and vocally oppose any form of concession to Tehran, passionately arguing that financial relief only serves to fund further regional terrorism and instability. Therefore, the current administration must execute a highly deceptive dual strategy. They must project a very public posture of unyielding toughness to satisfy angry congressional critics, while quietly implementing the terms of the unwritten agreements through obscure executive maneuvers, risking total political destruction if exposed. A strikingly parallel, equally dangerous dynamic unfolds within Iran's incredibly intricate and factional political structure. Radical hardline factions and extremely powerful military entities remain deeply and violently suspicious of any diplomatic engagement with the West. They view the secret, pragmatic negotiations as nothing less than a treasonous betrayal of core revolutionary principles. To placate these heavily armed and highly influential domestic forces, the Iranian leadership must continuously authorize and fund aggressive public statements and spectacular symbolic acts of defiance. The silent negotiators must privately assure the hardliners that they are not capitulating to American demands, but merely extracting vital tactical advantages. This intense internal power struggle constantly threatens to permanently derail the fragile, unwritten agreements. Ultimately, the dark, complex relationship between Washington and Tehran is a perpetual, high-stakes chess game played precariously on the very edge of an endless abyss. The grand, terrifying public narratives of impending war and insurmountable hatred
are in many crucial ways merely the necessary rhetorical shields behind which the real, exhaustive work of avoiding mutual destruction quietly takes place. As long as these secret back channels remain functional and open, the world's incredibly fragile energy markets stay relatively stable, and the most destructive missiles remain locked safely in their silos. Diplomacy in this shadowy realm is not about achieving a lasting utopian peace. It is purely about managing an enduring hostility, ensuring the final move is never made.